I think one of the biggest changes that cetaceans face when they are put into captivity is what I call a reduction in their horizon. These are animals that when they are in the wild, they're constantly being challenged, they're constantly moving, they're constantly looking into finding food, finding mates, finding partners to socialize with, interacting with the other animals, not the other orcas or belugas or bottlenose dolphins, but the birds and the fish and their prey. They're always looking for something and finding it when they're in the wild. But in captivity, there's nothing to look for and there's nothing to find. Their natural behaviors, hunting, socializing, mating with animals they choose to mate with, that's all taken away from them. And I think, again, whether they're born there or not, that's still going to be a problem for them. Choice is everything to an intelligent animal, and they don't have much in the way of choice, whether they're born there or brought there from the wild. One of the most basic measures of animal welfare in captivity, so we're talking about the zoo situation in general, and everywhere there are any species of wildlife held in captivity, is life expectancy or survivorship. And the flip side of survivorship is mortality. So if you're looking at the survivorship or mortality rate, you are looking at the most basic measure of animal welfare in captivity. And when you look at belugas, up until a few years ago, we didn't know exactly how long belugas could live in the wild. And then a study was done in 2006, which determined that the aging process that scientists have been using, which involves sectioning teeth and looking at the rings in the teeth like the rings of a tree, had been off by a factor of 2. In other words, the animals were living twice as long as we thought they would. So up until 2006, it looked like beluga whales were actually doing fairly well in captivity because they could live 25 to 30 years fairly often, and then, into their teens and 20s pretty routinely. And so if their maximum longevity was 35 or so, that might look pretty good. But then it turned out in 2006 with this study that was done that in fact that they were living 65 to 70 years. And so suddenly 25 to 30 years, routinely didn't look so good. So in fact, it looks like these animals' lifespans are about halved when they're put into captivity. The paradigm that you have to see an animal in the flesh, up close and personal, and even touch it, to care for it and to learn to love it, and therefore to contribute to its conservation in the wild. 1, I don't believe it. And 2, if it's true, if that paradigm is true, we might as well give up right now, because there are a whole bunch of species of whales and dolphins, seals and sea lions, wildlife, insects, invertebrates, birds that are not in captivity anywhere. And if captivity is the only thing that allows a human being to develop empathy for these animals, then all of those species that aren't in zoos are, well, they're screwed, aren't they? I mean, that's a ridiculous paradigm. It's clearly not true, because a lot of people care about animals they've never even seen. I think that the wise and forward-looking public display institutions out there are starting to realize, whether through their own research or just reading the newspaper, that the public's view of captivity for whales and dolphins is changing. In my opinion, the only way to end captive display for whales and dolphins is to prohibit the breeding and to end the import and export into a facility. It has to be an all or nothing proposition. I think that Jane Goodall's letter to the park board about phasing out captivity was spot on. We are talking about phasing this out. We're not talking about ending it tomorrow. 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago, we did not know any better. We didn't know that what we were doing to these animals was bad for the animals. We didn't know that. We didn't know it was a welfare problem. And so, out of ignorance and a desire to learn, we did some pretty bad things to these animals. And now, 20, 30, 40 years later, we know a lot more about them, some of which we learned in captivity. So let's stop being so stubborn about this. Let's change the way we think And when I say we in this context, I'm talking about scientists, because I am one. And let's just move forward into the 21st century. It is very bad science to refuse to learn from new knowledge, to refuse to absorb and integrate new knowledge into the way you think. And that's my message to the people at the Vancouver Aquarium. I know some of those folks, and I respect them, but I am flabbergasted at their inability to recognize that what happens to these animals in captivity is wrong.